Margaret sat in the high-backed chair by the window, her posture still regal, but her hands trembled slightly as they rested in her lap. Outside, autumn leaves drifted slowly to the ground, orange and gold against the fading light. The season had turned, and so had her life. Everyone had envied her. The power, the fortune, the young husband who seemed devoted beyond question. She had been the symbol of a life well lived. The kind of story whispered about at dinner tables. But what no one saw was this moment. The silence that pressed against her chest. The confession that still echoed in her mind like words carved into stone. Margaret Ellis closed her eyes. She let the weight of it sit there, unshakable, unmovable. She thought of the boardroom that awaited her tomorrow, the headlines she could not stop, and the whispers she could never silence. It would have been easier if he had simply left. Easier if she could have pointed to betrayal and called it by its name. But Liam Carter had not left her. He had looked her in the eye, voice unsteady, and told her the truth. The truth that unraveled everything. And so she sat there, a woman admired by the world, but undone in her own home. The world would ask, how could she not have known? She would ask herself the same question. For now there were only the leaves falling, the quiet room, and the shadow of a confession too heavy for words. This was where her story began. Not at the height of power, not at the glow of admiration, but here, in the stillness after it all came undone. Margaret Ellis at 58 was the very picture of success. Her name carried weight in boardrooms. Her speeches filled magazine covers. She had grown her company from a small consultancy into a powerhouse admired across the country. And with every passing year, she seemed to defy time. Silver hair framing her face like a crown, posture steady, eyes sharp with focus. People spoke of her in hushed tones, not with pity but with envy. She has it all, they would say, and they believed it. Her mansion on the hill hosted charity galas. Her name was listed among the most influential women in America. And by her side was Liam Carter, 27, handsome, attentive, with a presence that softened her edges. When they appeared together, it was as though the world itself leaned in. A woman of stature and power, hand in hand with a man young enough to be her son, yet carrying himself with a grace that silenced judgment. For every raised eyebrow, there was another look of admiration. Margaret knew the whispers. She had lived long enough to hear them echo through corridors and across dinner tables. He married her for money. He's playing the long game. She must be desperate for love. But in the quiet of her own home, she chose not to let those whispers in. Liam laughed with her in the kitchen late at night. He read her poetry by the fire. He took her hand in public without hesitation. Whatever the world believed, she told herself, she had found something real. Yet even then, a shadow sometimes crossed his eyes. She would ask about his past, and he would change the subject. She would wonder aloud about children, and he would fall silent. These were moments she tucked away, like loose threads she did not dare pull. Margaret Ellis believed she could hold her life together by sheer force of will. She had built empires. She had silenced doubters. Surely love, too, could be commanded into permanence. But even the strongest walls can crack. Even the most envied woman can sit alone one evening and realize she never truly knew the man she let into her heart. The photo frames, the gala speeches, the magazine covers, they were all pieces of a story. But the truth was waiting, quietly, patiently, until the day Liam Carter chose to speak it aloud. Liam Carter was young, but not careless. He carried himself with a charm that disarmed critics and a tenderness that softened Margaret's sharper edges. He would walk into a room of doubters and leave with their approval. Margaret admired that. It was part of what drew her to him in the first place. And yet, there were nights when the mask slipped. He would step out onto the balcony after midnight, phone pressed to his ear, voice hushed. When she asked who it was, he would smile faintly and say, "No one important." He often returned late from errands that should have taken an hour. His explanations neat, but never quite enough. Margaret Ellis told herself she was imagining it. She had lived long enough to know suspicion could be poison. And so, she smoothed over the doubts, tucked them into the corners of her mind, and carried on. After all, hadn't she faced worse storms than this? Still, the silences between them began to stretch. Liam, once eager to share his every thought, grew cautious. His laughter lingered less. His eyes sometimes drifted when she spoke, as though some other weight pressed against his mind. Sophia Grant, Margaret's assistant, noticed too. She didn't say it outright, but her glances carried unspoken concern. She once found Liam standing in the corridor outside Margaret's office. lost in thought, as if rehearsing words he couldn't yet bring himself to speak. It was in those moments Margaret felt the distance most. Not in the public eye where everything sparkled, but in the private silences of their shared life. She had built her career on reading people, on sensing truths beneath the surface. And yet, when it came to Liam Carter, she held herself back, as if afraid of what she might find. The shadows were not yet confessions. They were only hints, faint and fleeting. But they were enough to remind her that even the brightest rooms hold darkness in their corners. And sometimes, it is the shadows that tell the truest story of all. One evening, as she walked past the half-closed door of her study, she caught Liam Carter's voice. Low, hurried, edged with a kind of nervousness she had never heard from him before. The call ended quickly, the silence falling heavy in its wake. When she asked him later, he smiled faintly. "Just a friend," he said, but the warmth in his tone did not match the sharpness she had overheard. The following week, Sophia Grant leaned close after a board meeting. Her voice was careful, respectful. "Margaret, I think Liam is carrying something heavy. I don't know what it is, but I thought you should know." Margaret nodded, but her heart clenched. She had spent a lifetime ignoring whispers, the doubts of competitors, the gossip of rivals. But this whisper was different. It came from within her home, from the very heart she had trusted. At night, she lay awake beside Liam, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. She wondered if he dreamed of her, or of someone else. And slowly, quietly, the question began to take root. What truth was he hiding? Margaret Ellis had never been afraid of questions. In the boardroom, questions were weapons she wielded with precision. But asking them in her own marriage felt like stepping into dangerous ground. One late evening, with the house bathed in the soft glow of lamplight, she could no longer hold it in. She turned to Liam Carter, her voice steady, though her heart pounded beneath the calm. "Liam, what is it you're not telling me?" He looked up, startled. For a moment she thought he might brush it off with another half-smile, another easy excuse. But instead his eyes darted away, as though searching for an escape. "There's nothing," he began, but the words faltered. "Don't lie to me," she whispered, more plea than command. The silence stretched between them. Margaret felt it pressing down, heavier than any shareholder's scrutiny, heavier than any headline. Liam lowered his head into his hands. His shoulders trembled, and when he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "Margaret, there's something I should have told you long ago." She sat still, her breath caught, her heart unwilling to move forward but unable to go back. The confrontation was no longer a choice, it had become a threshold. And once crossed, there would be no return. The words came slowly, as if each one carried the weight of stone. Liam Carter did not shout, nor did he try to excuse himself. He simply confessed. "I thought I could keep it separate, that it wouldn't touch us. But it does. Margaret, I've been seeing someone else." The words hung in the air, sharper than any blade. For a moment, Margaret could not move. She sat as though frozen, her mind refusing to accept what her ears had heard. She, Margaret Ellis, the woman admired, the woman envied, reduced now to a wife betrayed. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, almost detached. "Who?" He hesitated, then whispered a name she did not know, younger, closer to his age. A reminder of the years that stretched between them, years she had believed love could overcome. Margaret closed her eyes. She had faced market crashes, hostile takeovers, betrayals in business, but nothing compared to this. This was not about money or power. This was about trust. And trust, once broken, is never whole again. Liam reached for her hand, tears brimming in his eyes. "I never meant to hurt you. You have to believe that." But Margaret Ellis knew belief was not something one could demand. It was either present, or it was lost. And in that moment, she felt it slipping away, like sand through her fingers. The confession was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was simply final. And with it, the life she had built, the one so many had envied, began to crack at its foundation. Morning came, but it did not feel like morning. The sun rose as it always had, but for Margaret Ellis, the light no longer warmed. It fell cold across the marble floors of her home, across the photographs that once told a story of triumph, across the reflection in the mirror that now seemed like a stranger's face. The night of Liam Carter's confession had not ended in anger. There were no raised voices, no storming footsteps. Instead, there was silence, a silence that stretched into dawn. A silence that spoke more than words ever could. Margaret sat at her dressing table, staring at the pearls she had worn to countless galas, symbols of power, symbols of elegance. She had worn them proudly, believing herself untouchable. Now they felt heavy, mocking, as though every gem whispered, "Envy fades when truth arrives." She thought of the women who had once looked at her with envy. They saw a fairy tale, the powerful CEO with the young, devoted husband. They never saw the shadows, the doubts, the nights she had wondered if love had a lifespan. Now she wondered if those women would envy her still or pity her. Her crown, the one built from admiration, discipline, and resilience, felt cracked. And though she held her chin high, inside she felt the weight of pieces slipping away. It was not business that undid her, not competitors, not markets. It was love, the one thing she believed might stand outside the reach of power. And so, Margaret Ellis rose from her chair, not as the woman the world envied, but as a woman undone. Secrets do not stay secrets for long, especially when whispers become too heavy for walls to contain. Within days, the truth slipped into the wrong hands. A journalist, Daniel Reed, had been circling for months, sensing that something behind Margaret Ellis's perfect life did not quite add up. Liam Carter's late-night calls, the evasions, the nervous glances, they had not gone unnoticed, and when the confession reached him, Daniel did what journalists do. He wrote. The headlines spread across papers and screens. The CEO everyone envied betrayed at home. For shareholders, it was not the betrayal that mattered, but the appearance of weakness. Investors disliked weakness. Board members whispered about reputations and stability. Was Margaret Ellis still fit to lead if she could not hold her own household together? At the office, conversations stilled when she entered the room. Eyes that once shone with admiration now flickered with curiosity, pity, even judgment. Her authority had not vanished, but it had shifted. No longer the unshakable certainty it once was. Margaret walked through the storm with her head held high, but each headline cut deep, not because of what they said, but because of what they implied. That her love had been a performance, that her worth was tied to her husband's devotion, that the woman admired for her strength was in truth fragile. The ruin was not financial. It was not material. It was the ruin of image, of pride, of the illusion she had built so carefully. And Margaret knew, illusions once shattered cannot be rebuilt. In the storm of judgment, not everyone turned away. Sophia Grant stood by her side, her loyalty unshaken. She managed schedules, blocked calls from relentless reporters, and shielded Margaret as best she could. "You don't have to face this alone," she whispered one evening, her hand steady on Margaret's arm. Evelyn Ward, longtime friend and board member, called late at night, her voice calm but firm. "You've survived worse. You'll survive this too." A man's betrayal does not undo a woman's worth. Those words lingered. They did not erase the pain, but they reminded Margaret that not all voices were cruel. Some voices carried strength when her own faltered. And yet, even with their support, the loneliness was vast. The house felt too large, the halls too quiet. Liam was still there, still trying to explain, still insisting he loved her. But love, Margaret realized, was no longer enough. Trust was the ground beneath it, and once broken, the ground could not hold. In moments of solitude, she walked the garden paths behind her home. The leaves crunched underfoot, the autumn air sharp with change. She thought of the company she had built, the empire she had guarded, the life she had crafted so carefully. And she thought of how easily it had been undone, not by competitors, not by markets, but by the words of a man she trusted. Still, she was not entirely alone. The loyal few reminded her, even when crowns shatter, some bonds remain. Liam Carter had not planned for this. When he first met Margaret Ellis, he had been drawn to her strength. Her presence filled every room she entered. She carried herself like someone who knew the weight of the world but bore it with grace. For a young man still finding his place, that steadiness felt like an anchor. He told himself and her that love knew no age. He believed it at first. Perhaps a part of him still believed it now. But time has a way of pressing on differences, making them heavier with each passing year. Her late nights of strategy meetings clashed with his restless desire for something freer, lighter. And in the quiet of those differences, temptation found him. Liam never set out to betray her. The younger woman he turned to had simply listened when he felt unheard, laughed when he felt unseen, and reminded him of a life he thought he had set aside. It was not love, not in the way he had loved Margaret, but it was enough to lure him away from truth. When he confessed, it was not out of cruelty, it was out of a tiredness that weighed on him, a burden of living one story in public and another in private. He told her because he could not continue the lie. And yet, As he looked at Margaret's face in the silence after his confession, he realized the truth was not freedom. It was devastation. For Liam Carter, the world would always call him the betrayer. For Margaret Ellis, the betrayed. And somewhere in between was the love they once believed could defy the years. The days after the confession blurred together. Meetings filled with sidelong glances. Headlines that refused to fade. Nights of silence where once there had been laughter. Margaret Ellis walked through it all with a calm that surprised even herself. But beneath that calm was a decision taking shape. She could choose to stay, to forgive, to endure the whispers. Or she could choose to leave, to reclaim the dignity that had been bruised but not destroyed. Forgiveness was not foreign to her. She had forgiven business partners, forgiven rivals. But this was different. Forgiveness here meant living each day beside the man who had broken the fragile trust she gave him. It meant hearing his promises and wondering if they were hollow. It meant carrying the weight of doubt into every tomorrow. One evening, she stood in her garden, the autumn air sharp against her skin. Liam came to her, his voice unsteady. "Margaret, I'll do whatever it takes. Please, don't give up on us." She looked at him, really looked at him. The man who had once been her comfort was now the source of her deepest wound. She could see the regret in his eyes. She could feel the sincerity in his plea. But she also felt the fracture inside herself, a fracture that no apology could mend. Margaret Ellis chose silence that night, and in that silence, the choice was clear. She would not return to the illusion. She would walk forward, alone if she must, but with her dignity intact. In time, the headlines moved on. New scandals replaced the old. New faces filled the covers of magazines. But Margaret Ellis remained. She continued to lead her company, her decisions steady, her voice unwavering. The boardroom still listened when she spoke. Investors still leaned forward at her words. The world still envied her power, though now they spoke of her with a hint of caution, as if unsure whether to pity her or admire her resilience. At home, the silence became companion rather than punishment. She filled it with walks in her garden, with books she had once set aside, with the quiet company of those who had stood by her. The photo of her and Liam remained on the corner table, though she no longer flinched when she passed it. It was not a wound anymore, but a reminder. A reminder that crowns are fragile, that love, no matter how dazzling, can falter, that envy is often built on illusions. And yet, there was dignity in her solitude. There was strength in having faced what she feared most, and still standing. The world would remember Margaret Ellis not as the woman undone by her husband's confession, but as the woman who faced it with grace, who carried the weight without collapsing beneath it. In the end, her legacy was not built on envy. It was built on endurance. In the end, Margaret Ellis discovered that what the world envies is often only a shadow. It was never the crown, nor the young husband, nor the headlines that defined her. It was the silence she carried, and the strength she chose to rise with, even when love betrayed her. Sometimes what breaks us does not leave us ruined, it leaves us revealed. And perhaps that is Margaret Ellis's legacy. Not the admiration of strangers, but the quiet endurance of a woman who refused to let one confession define her worth. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments. What moment in Margaret Ellis's journey moved you the most? And if you were listening closely, you might notice how often Margaret Ellis's name came up. Drop your answer in the comments. We may feature your name in a shout-out as a thank you for being part of our Fiction Echoes family. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this one, the next chapter is already waiting. Just click the video that's about to appear, and we'll see you there. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a moment of what happens next.